Hello, my name is Sneha Khilay and I'm a 1080 coach. Today I'll be talking about the benefits of using metaphors when managing teams. Metaphors have always been around from the time when Shakespeare used a lot of metaphors in his writings. Can I compare thee to a summer's day? To lots of historical figures who've become masters of creating vivid imagery. So if I give a couple of examples, Nelson Mandela in his book Long Walk to Freedom, his last line was, after climbing a great hill, one finds there are many more hills to climb. Gandhi also used metaphors extensively. He talked about an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. So these are some of the examples of metaphors, and I'm going to go into what is a metaphor. So a metaphor is a word or a phrase that means one thing and is used to describe as something else to emphasize its meaning. One of the most talked about metaphors is Muhammad Ali's float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Of course, he's not floating like a butterfly, nor is he stinging like a bee. But what he's really saying is, I've got the ability to move around lightly and quickly, and my punches are very effective to the point that they would sting. Metaphors are also used in love. I like this one, you are my blue crayon, the one I never have enough of, the one I use to color the sky. Metaphors are also used in films. Forrest Gump, his metaphor has been used extensively. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what chocolate you're going to get. And of course, metaphors are used as animals. I've got butterflies in my stomach. Let's talk about the gray elephant in the room. And even from work perspective, we use metaphors of a cash cow. And similarly with work, there are work-related metaphors. Let's touch base later. Let's get up to speed. Liquidity of assets to go the extra mile. And also climbing up career ladder and running a tight ship. Those are good examples of some of the metaphors that people are using. And I particularly like the next quote where Orson Scott Card says, metaphors have a way of holding the most truth in the least space. So what's the value of using metaphors when managing teams? What research has shown is that metaphors come from and are received from the right side of the brain. And of course, the right side of the brain deals with emotions and imaginations. So through the use of metaphors, you're going beyond, you're taking into consideration more senses and looking at the impact of words through the language patterns of metaphors. The listener can visualize actual images and create an emotional reactions. And it becomes a valuable tool to communicate complex concepts, and it creates connections and shared understanding. So when people are able to share what they're really feeling through the use of metaphors, it does create connections and shared understanding. So what are the benefits? It's a mechanism for team members to express their feelings in an illustrative and imaginary way. It also can provide clarity, what the individual notices or wants to emphasize. And this is a really good point. So if I give you an example, in a team building session where there were some changes going on, and in that team building, managers were present, and we did about a metaphor to describe your experience of the changes you're going through. And one person said, I feel like I'm in the middle of Paddington Station. Everybody knows where they're going, and I keep looking at the board and my train is delayed and I don't even know what time the train is coming. And I thought that was a good use of a metaphor where he's saying he's not understanding the process and he's feeling isolated and he's lost his purpose. And in that instance, the management would communicate with him a lot more extensively and give him updates on a regular basis. Similarly, I was talking to a team member in another context where he was busy project managing and he was a project manager, and he used the metaphor, I feel as if I'm out at sea and I'm in a boat by myself and one oar is missing and I feel like I'm going round in circles, and I'm not making any progress. And that was a really interesting use of the metaphor, because he lost out at sea meant that he was a bit lost and that he wasn't engaging with the team that he'd wanted to. And then we talked at length, what steps could he take so that he's not out at sea, but he could then go back to shore and get the support he wants. And those are really interesting metaphors. It can be seen as a process by which team members explain the situation from their perspective. And it's an opportunity to consider different perspectives and different language patterns. And this provides an understanding of how team members receive and perceive information. So certainly in one instance where the managers, the senior managers, were concerned about the level of bullying and harassment that was going on. And what I suggested was them to look out for the language patterns being used by the staff members. And when staff members were saying things like, oh, I feel as if there's spy rings, or there's a secret police force monitoring me, or I have to stand upright when the managers goes by. And although they were laughing about it, those metaphors were an indication that they didn't feel safe, and that there was a climate of suspicion. And equally, metaphors provide support or follow up accordingly. And I was talking to a manager with her manager present, and the question I'd asked was, how are you managing your team? And she responded that it feels like as if I'm dragging a bull to water so that the bull can drink water. And for me, that conjured up her literally pulling the bull. And I then asked her, how do you feel? And at that point, she became very emotional and said that I'm just so tired and I just feel so overwhelmed because the bull is not willing to shift. Again, that was a good indication of a good use of a metaphor. And the manager listening to her then said, what I'm going to be doing is together, you and I, we can have one-to-one meetings with individual staff members, which was the support that was required. And then it was also suggested for them to go and organize a team building. So just to bring to your attention that there are some considerations about the use of metaphors. Don't mix up metaphors because that can cause confusion for the listener. And if you can, avoid using too many metaphors, because each metaphor is a message in itself and you want to understand the message. Avoid using ones that are overly complex, where the message gets lost in translation. And lastly, we now work at a global level, we work at an international level, and consider the audience to determine what metaphors will have the greatest impact. So if you were talking about metaphors and you'd use something like, oh, this feels like as if we're in EastEnders, as an example, somebody in another part of the world may not understand the metaphor of what is meant by EastEnders. Thank you for your time.